Hi everybody. Can everybody hear me all right? Is that all right? Oh, just first of all, thanks to Ronnie for inviting us down, and I'd like to echo the speaker before's comments. Thanks for all his hard work. It's an absolute pleasure to be here among some of my heroes, Ken and Billy, Di, of course. We're really honoured from the Orgreave campaign to be invited today, so thanks so much. We're here obviously to remember one of Barnsley's most famous actors, Brian Glover, but shockingly when I was doing my research I found out that he was born in Sheffield. But he was brought up in Barnsley, so we're claiming it as ours, and he could also say thee and thou, so any more proof needed, we definitely know it is one of ours. But before I talk about Brian, I'd like to talk about our campaign. We set up the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign in December 2012. It's nearly 10 years ago now. I'm surprised I've not gone more grey over the last 10 years of the ups and downs we've had with the campaign. And we set up the campaign because at that time, in December 2012, Hillsborough Justice campaigners had just proved that they didn't lie about the police mishandling of the disaster in Sheffield. And we thought, well, if the football fans can do it, then we should be able to do it for our miners as well. So there's lots of similarities between what happened at Hillsborough and Orgreave for people who don't know. For one, it's geographically very close. It's only a few miles apart. And also, shockingly, the same police officers that were involved at Hillsborough and the cover-up there were also involved at Orgreave. So I'd argue that if you don't get justice for Orgreave, you'll never get real justice for what happened at Hillsborough. And the establishment did the exact same cover-ups at Hillsborough what they did at Orgreave as well, like they'd learnt a lesson of how to cover these tragedies up. They blamed the victims at Hillsborough for what happened to them. Can you remember the shocking headlines? Liverpool fans picking dead people's pockets, etc., urinating on dead people's bodies. They did the exact same thing at Orgreave. They tried to blame the victims of the crime and blame them as being the perpetrators. So the same pattern repeats itself unless we get justice. And that's why it's so important that we fight for justice for what happened at Orgreave and to remember those people that were so badly treated. We also, for people who don't know what happened at Orgreave, a quick history lesson, but I'm looking around the crowd, I think most of you already do, so I'll skip over this quite quickly. It happened on the 18th of June 1984. It was 3 months into the long miners' strike, and the miners had decided to picket the coking plant because they wanted to bring the strike to an end. They'd done this very successfully in the 1970s at Saltley Gate, and the Thatcher government knew that they couldn't allow this to happen again because that strike brought down the Tory government, and they were trying to do that again. The Thatcher government wasn't about to let that happen. If you've seen the footage of what happened at Orgreave, for people who've seen the images and the video, it's an absolute miracle nobody were killed that day. And the lawyers who were eventually let in to see the miners who were arrested described wading through vomit and urine before they got to the miners, and the miners had been refused medical treatment until the lawyers insisted that they were given medical treatment. The miners had to bandage each other with t-shirts and ripped jeans. They had fractured skulls, broken arms, and all the rest of it. An absolute disgrace of what happened. Eventually 95 miners were charged with riot, which is one of the most serious offences you can be charged with on a demonstration. It carried a life sentence at the time, and they were also given bail conditions that stopped them from picketing again throughout the rest of the strike. This is another thing that the police and the establishment have learnt. Now if you're arrested on demonstrations or picket lines, again you're given trumped-up bail conditions to stop you continuing the fight, and they did that to great success in the miners' strike. No police officer has ever been held to account for what happened that day, and it was proved quite quickly when the trial eventually got to court and it came to trial after the strike had finished, that every single miner was acquitted, and the trial collapsed because the police were proven to have lied in their statements, just like they did a few years later at Hillsborough. So that's enough of the campaign. As you see, I get a bit irate about it because we're still fighting for justice to this day, and we won't give up until we get justice. So a little bit on Brian. Like everybody else who's here today, they'll remember Kes as being the most famous film. It was released in 1969, and where Brian played the famous bullying head teacher. Apparently it was Barry Hines who suggested him for the role, And when he asked Brian about the role, he said it'd be easy because he'd split up so many fights in his normal job as a school teacher. And I'm sure his wrestling career didn't hurt him much either, and he'd followed in the wrestling career after his father as well. Brian went on to star in many other films. Two of my favourites are The American Werewolf in London and An Alien 3, I think it is. I don't know if people have seen them or not, but if you haven't, you should check them out. Yeah. He was known as his hard man image, Brian, as an actor, but a lot of people don't know he also starred in many Shakespeare performances throughout his career as well. And I've discovered another good thing about being invited today, that he also stars in another one of Ken's films, which is from 1971, called Rank and File, and it's about the Pilkington's glass strike. And you can watch it for free on YouTube. I hope Ken doesn't mind me saying that, and you should go and buy it. Brian was a well-known socialist, and he donated money to the miners' strike. One of the biggest collections that he was involved in was at Christmas in 1984, where he helped raise £200,000 for a collection that was started by the Women Against Pit Closures. Him, and along with lots of other famous people at the time, contributed to that finance. And it was so important because people shouldn't forget, should I say, that the Tories actually sequestered the funds of the National Union of Mine Workers. They took their resources off them to try and starve the miners back to work. And it were people like yourselves in this crowd today, members of the community, members of trade unions, and obviously people like Brian, who raised that money to keep that strike going. And that strike lasted for 12 months. Now we have strikes that last for 5-6 months at the most. The longest strike we've had in my union, Unite, recently was the Coventry bin strike. That lasted for 7 months, and you'll be pleased to know we won that. But 12 months out on the picket line, when your union's under such attack, and the police are behaving in the way that they are, shows the courage of the National Union of Mine Workers, doesn't it? And something that we should never forget. A few facts about the strike still blow my mind when I read these out. 165,000 miners were on strike for 12 months. That's a hell of a lot of people to sustain, a lot of people to feed every day, and a lot of families going without. 11,313 people were arrested, 7,000 injured. They're not scratches on the back of the leg, these are people who were hospitalised. 5,653 people were put on trial, and sometimes the courts worked all night to get them miners convicted on trumped-up charges. 960 miners were sacked. Most of them never went on to work again. They were blacklisted from the industry.
When you can.
Sorry, mate. 200 miners were imprisoned, and 200 miners were imprisoned, and 2 miners were killed on picket lines. That's David Jones and Joe Green. And no police officer has ever been held to account for David Jones and Joe Green's deaths either. I'm going to rush because Ronnie's speeding me up. Arthur Scargill at the time said if we lost the strike, we'd suffer the consequences, and how right was he? All we need to do now is look around Barnsley at the 0 hours contracts, minimum wage jobs, lack of trade union representation that we're suffering, and I'd say that all comes down to the miners' strike. Thatcher knew she had to beat the miners to make a society like we live in today, with low cost wages and high cost everything else. The bankers' bonuses are going through the roof, and they're trying to blame wages on inflation. It's an absolute disgrace what's happening. So to finish up, everything's not lost. The strike waves are coming back again, aren't they? People are standing up and fighting again. In my own union, in the last 12 months, we've had 450 industrial disputes. 76,000 workers have took part in them disputes. 80% of them disputes have been won for once. So we're on the upturn, and 150 million quid has been put back into workers' pockets. So if you want to remember Brian and keep his socialist principles alive, and encourage you all to attend the picket lines on 1st of October. There's plenty to choose from. You've got the RMT, ASLEF representing rail workers, you've got the postal workers going out, and you've also got Unite members in various disputes in buses, port workers and elsewhere. So stand up for the working class, remember Brian, and thanks for coming today. Cheers.